Hello all, and welcome to another episode of Hangar 412, the show that gives you the rundown on all the lore and technology behind some of our favorite vehicles in fiction. And in today's episode, we'll be exploring the science and the lore behind the world's first Bernal spherical space colony, codenamed ARK, one of my all-time favorite space stations. And yes, I know I can already hear you typing away. Space stations aren't technically vehicles. I know, but they still technically count as spacecraft. So, I thought I'd go with it. I just want to talk about it, and I'm going to. And believe it or not, for a franchise that's really not known for the quality or consistency of its lore, the Space Colony ARK is about as fleshed out as any other space station from fiction or anime. For example, you think the Nina Tucker story was sad? Wait till the end of this video. So, without further rambling, let's roll the intro.
One of the saddest lessons of history is this: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back.
We're trying to help you. What are you, blind?
You're not interested in helping. You're here for control.
The ARK, otherwise known as the first Bernal spherical space colony, was built as the world's first off-world orbital space colony, and was an orbital laboratory for the United Federation's military, otherwise known as the Guardian Units of Nations, or simply just GUN for short. The Space Colony ARK project would be headed by none other than Dr. Gerald Robotnik, the world's greatest scientist. A real Renaissance man. He had mastered everything from archaeology, biology, astrophysics, robotics, and even alchemy, which plays somewhat of a role in his attempts to cure Maria through Project Shadow, which we'll touch on later. And of course, as you can see, the space colony went through many design iterations before they settled on the half-sphere kind of mushroom shape that we know and love today. As you can see, I don't think they were quite sure if they were going to be able to find an asteroid that was semi-spherical to use as a base for this project. As you can see, some of these design iterations very early on just seem to incorporate just a general lump potato-shaped rock. But you can see very early on, they did clearly settle on a somewhat spherical design, and then you can see Robotnik definitely tried to sneak his face in there a few times before settling on the more subtle design. You can see there with the bigger Eclipse Cannon, the face would be a lot more prominent. Something more like you would see Eggman make. Space Colony ARK would eventually be built out of a hemisphere-shaped asteroid about 15 kilometers across and weighing in at about 15 million tons. At least according to this, what's called an eye catch card, found in the Japanese version of the Sonic X cartoon. The term space colony would definitely be a bit of an understatement, as it would be home to over 100,000 people that would all be the world's greatest minds, from rocket scientists and alchemists to even test pilots, I'm sure, as even the Blue Falcon has ties to Project Shadow. Imagine a 24/7, 365, never-ending World's Fair populated almost exclusively by the world's greatest minds. 100,000 of them. And all of this in space! As a result, the ARK would be the world's most advanced research facility, which, ironically, would ultimately be its undoing. The Space Colony ARK was more than just a laboratory. It was a vessel to preserve Earth's biosphere. This plan to house the equivalent population of a major city and be a peaceful refuge for Earth's life in the unforgiving environment of space, to virtually guarantee that life's existence, no matter what may eventuate on the planet's surface below, is where Dr. Robotnik was inspired to christen the station the ARK. As part of this goal to preserve and protect Earth's life no matter what, Gerald also constructed an absolutely massive directed energy weapon nearly as long as the station is wide on the underside of the ARK. He dubbed this weapon the Eclipse Cannon, as it would be powerful enough to destroy even a star if necessary, and was ultimately designed to destroy asteroids and comets that may pose a risk to Earth. That will be important later. I'd like to emphasize these two facts here, that the Space Colony was literally designed as an ARK, and that Gerald Robotnik included a planetary defense weapon as part of the design. Plus, if you remember some of the lore from my previous videos, he had a huge hand in the development of guns, weapons manufacturing, and research, along with some of the information we'll touch on going into Project Shadow. Really leads me to believe that Dr. Robotnik knew more than he was letting on, and that he had a true hidden goal in mind the whole time. To put it as simply as I can, Dr. Gerald Robotnik makes an ARK to preserve all life on Earth, while also developing a series of advanced weapon systems. It almost seems like Dr. Robotnik was planning for war with the Black Arms the whole time. But when the government funds your research, they decide what your research is. So, it wasn't long after the completion of the Space Colony ARK that Dr. Gerald Robotnik would then be recruited by the United Federation's president to conduct research into immortality for him aboard the ARK for unknown purposes. Clearly, Dr. Robotnik wasn't an idiot, so I imagine he probably took this actually as an insult. A, he knew immortality was impossible, just a ludicrous goal, and even if it was possible, yeah, let's give a world leader, the leader of the United Federation, one of the most powerful empires in the world, yeah, let's give him immortality, and let's see how that goes. Let's pretend that would be a good idea. No. So, Robotnik refused just outright right off the bat, but sometime later he found that his granddaughter, Maria Robotnik, was born with a disease known as Neuroimmune Deficiency Syndrome, or NIDS. From everything I've gathered by looking into NIDS, it seems it's a close cousin to what we would call AIDS, as it's an autoimmune disorder. But in this case, it's an autoimmune disorder in the brain, which can lead to infection in the brain, which is obviously life-threatening. Though, as smart as Dr. Robotnik was, it does seem he did have a bad habit of falling for the old Faustian deal. So, of course, the good doctor took up the offer, in hopes that maybe even if he couldn't find the actual recipe for immortality, he might, just in his research, find a cure. So, he began working on Project Shadow, the project to create the ultimate undying life form. The other scientists aboard the ARK, though, thought that this was a fool's errand, and was also kind of mysterious given the fact that it was exclusively given to Robotnik exclusively by the president. So, with it being this fool's errand akin to chasing one shadow the way a dog chases its tail, the other scientists on the station dubbed it Project Shadow as sort of a joke. But Dr. Robotnik liked the name, and it stuck, and it became the official name for the Ultimate Lifeform Project. Just like how in real science, the Big Bang Theory, no, not the absolutely god-awful, god-forsaken sitcom that made people think they understand what being a nerd is, and for an auto reason, made them think they understand what autism is, when absolutely none of the things presented in that show about either one of those subjects are even remotely accurate at all. But back on topic, the term Big Bang was actually a derogatory term coined by Fred Hoyle, as he was being condescending to scientists that believed in the Big Bang Theory, as he thought that it was absolutely absurd that the whole universe could just poof into existence. And we still use the term Big Bang today, though that is slowly being replaced with something more accurate like inflation. No, not the Donald Trump, Joe Biden money glitch, where you print a bunch and make it worthless kind, but the actual expanding kind of inflation, as the universe has expanded in the past at rapid speed and is expanding today. But back on topic, to begin his research into possible methods to achieve this legendary immortality, Gerald started to research any historical accounts of such occurrences. Basic logic train: has anyone tried this before, and have they succeeded, and what can I learn from their failures or successes? It was during these studies he discovered that an ancient civilization of echidnas may have known of such a method involving none other than the 8 powerful mystical gems known as the 7 Chaos Emeralds and the all-powerful Master Emerald. And of course, being contracted by the United Federation's president himself personally, I'm sure Gerald had easy access to these stones. The trick was, however, to find how to harness their mystical properties for medicinal purposes. This led Gerald to plan an expedition to the vast jungles of the Mystic Ruins region, where he would discover an ancient pyramid containing a giant mural depicting a god of the ancient echidnas destroying what appears to be an ancient city with what appears to be water or some kind of giant flood. This ancient god had the ability to metabolize the Chaos Emerald's energy, thus granting the creature incredible powers and, of course, immortality. So knowing that it can and has in fact actually been done in the past, Gerald just had to deduce how the creature was able to harness the Chaos Emerald's energy for metabolic processes. But as anyone that knows anything about a certain drug called spice or Bernal would know, just because nature can do it does not in fact mean you can do it yourself in the laboratory. Bernal is synthetic tetrahydrocannabinol, or more commonly referred to as THC. Synthetic lab-made THC does what I am depicting here. Allegedly, I must note. So, these are the effects of synthetic drugs. And THC that's naturally produced by flowers gives you this. Not trying to get too lost in a libertarian hippie pro-drug argument here, but it still stands as a perfect example of man trying to play God and it spectacularly backfiring. I mean, simply, we don't know what we don't know. The lesson is clear. The Earth has had 4.5 billion years to practice and play with biochemistry and get it right, and the universe as a whole has had 13.8. So you think you can really get it right in a couple of decades?
Alchemists are those who take things away from their natural form and convert them into something grotesque. In hubris, they profane God, creator of all, claiming that they have a better design.
And we'll soon see how true that is even for Gerald here. Gerald then returned to the Ark, where he tried to reverse engineer the biology of this chaos creature. This led him to create a whole line of his own artificial chaos creatures, and his line of chaos drives to power them. Somewhere between biology, technology, and mythology, these artificial chaos creatures came in 2 forms, heavily resembling a mechanized version of the original god that inspired their creation in the first place. But a very bastardized, unnatural, unsettling version, of course. The first of which, the P1 variant, was a slim creature almost identical to Chaos's zero state, the state that Chaos can be found in when he possesses 0 of the Chaos Emeralds. The second form was designated as P100 and simply looks like a larger, more spherical version of the P1, and has the ability to subdivide into smaller what are known as cell forms that can act as a swarm to overwhelm the enemy or even act as a shield by clustering around the head. But to be expected when you start to play in the realm of God, and I'm an atheist saying this, things went awry. These chaos creatures, of course, went rogue and started to attack the Ark and all of her inhabitants. This would lead Gunn to launch a mission to retake the Ark from these artificial chaos creatures, but it also seems this smaller, less remembered raid served a wider array of objectives than we originally thought. The first objective would be to bring the artificial chaos crisis to an end and regain control of the ARK. This part was obvious. And third, the artificial chaos crisis would serve as both justification for not just the upcoming raid, but, here's the genius bit, for the cover story they would use to cover it up as well. Now here's where I got kind of confused with the timeline and sequence of events. I'm not quite sure if this next topic we'll talk about happened before, after, or concurrently with the artificial chaos crisis, but it seems like it could have been either one of the three. My guess is it was probably just before. That's what it seems like, at least. But if you have a different interpretation or any information that can tell us a concrete sequence of events here, that would be great. But regardless, at some point during Dr. Gerald's research into the civilizations that worship the aforementioned ancient chaos god, he discovered an ancient robot known as a Gizoid. This Gizoid was apparently an ancient doomsday machine that wiped out civilizations in the distant past. Dr. Robotnik attempted to gain control over and reprogram the Gizoid for peace. During these experiments, however, as expected, things went awry and the Gizoid began to attack the ARK. Gunn, of course, would be deployed to fight this robot as well. After the Gizoid incident, Gerald would attempt to offer the robot to Gunn as a sort of bribe to let him finish his research into the President's requested project. However, the deadly sequence of events leading to the infamous raid were already in progress, and the raid was all but inevitable. However, Gerald's propensity to take on Faustian deals would rear its ugly head once more, as he would request the help of an alien leader known as Black Doom. And with his help, Gerald would succeed in his quest, and he finally created the ultimate life form that we would know as Shadow the Hedgehog.
I made a Faustian deal with that monster to create Shadow. Now it seems that we all have to pay for my sins.
Dr. Gerald's granddaughter Maria and Shadow would quickly become close friends and became absolutely inseparable. Meanwhile, Gerald was rightfully suspicious of Black Doom's intentions, so he began work on the ARK's Eclipse Cannon. This cannon was intended to destroy Black Doom's homeworld known as the Black Comet, and would ultimately do so some 50 years later. But things took a dark turn when politics got thrown in the mix with groundbreaking science. During the past raids, Gunn found out about the United Federation President's secret project, Project Shadow. Gunn feared an ultimate immortal life form would be too dangerous to be completed. So, much like the over-militarized police of our own world, fearing losing their monopoly on violence and oppression, even though Dr. Gerald Robotnik posed absolutely zero threat to his fellow Sapients on Earth, the militarized police of the Guardian Units of Nations lacked this sapience and care for their fellow Sentients. So, in response, Gunn launched their most infamous raid, Operation ARK Seal, and raided the ARK to prevent Project Shadow's completion. This raid was a 7-day massacre, mass arrest, and deportation of all the colony's residents.
This is the Guardian Units of Nations. Prepare to be boarded.
Tell them there are children and women in here and to call it off. There's kids in here and everything, we know that. Call it off!
You're not interested in helping. You're here for control.
Maria!
The government launching a totally unjustified raid on a facility full of innocent women and children and killing them? With weapons such as grenade launchers, arson, and chemical weapons? No, I can't say that I can think of such a thing. Or why such a thing would even be a subtext for this video. And clearly not a subtle one either. Though, it does seem Gerald kinda had the last laugh, as Project Shadow was already completed. To illustrate how one can be sentient but lack sapience, how one can think and feel but not understand and reason, we need to look no further than Maria's infamous death. As Maria and Shadow attempted to flee the unnecessary violence and slaughter occurring aboard the Ark, gun soldiers found them and ran them down, finally fatally shooting Maria, killing her in cold blood. Though even being fatally shot, she was able to stay alive just long enough to help Shadow reach the escape pod and find his way to Earth, where he would be eventually recaptured by Gunn. After this, Shadow was recaptured and taken and locked away on Prison Island, and the Ark was shut down and abandoned for 50 years. The government released an official statement stating that the Ark was shut down due to an unfortunate accident. All other further research into Project Shadow would be stored on Prison Island in the South Sea, while research into other weapon systems such as robots, drones, and aircraft would continue at a secret research facility located somewhere in the deserts of the United Federation. The fate of the Ark's other residents is unclear, though it's shown that Gerald was arrested, presumably interrogated, and executed via firing squad as a method of covering up the operation.
Is there anything else you want to say? No. Ready!
Just reminding everyone, this game was rated E. This was a kid's game. And we never hear from any of the other 100,000 personnel that once called the Ark home. So it's likely they were all liquidated as well. And as far as I could find with my research, there have only been 3 characters that have specifically been mentioned to have survived the raid on the Ark. Those being, of course, the aforementioned Gerald Robotnik, and, ironically enough, the cop that shot his granddaughter, and the third being a small child named Abraham Tower, who was a friend of Maria's aboard the Ark, who would grow up to be who we know as the Gun Commander, seemingly second only to the President himself, essentially commander of the entire organization. So, in response to all this needless government-sanctioned thuggery, somewhere between his arrest and his subsequent execution, Dr. Gerald instituted a doomsday plan for if the Ark and her Eclipse Cannon ever fell out of his control, wanting to deny not just Gunn but also the Black Arms from using the Ark for their own evil intentions. If all 7 Chaos Emeralds were inserted into the Eclipse Cannon's main power supply in the Ark central control room, the Ark would automatically begin to deorbit itself, and the Eclipse Cannon's core would become highly unstable and explosive. The Ark would then collide with the Earth with enough kinetic energy to cause a global mass extinction event, as well as detonate the cannon's core, which would have even larger consequences. This was a literal scorched earth policy that would prevent the Black Arms, Guardian Units of Nations, or even his grandson, Dr. Ivo Robotnik, from subjugating the world below. Dr. Gerald Robotnik was in every way a very reasonable man, very much forced to do unreasonable things. But back on topic, 50 years after the incident, Dr. Gerald Robotnik's grandson, Ivo Eggman Robotnik, would launch a raid of his own on Prison Island and released Shadow the Hedgehog, who led him to the control room on the Ark. And thus begins the events of Sonic Adventure 2 and the subsequent games. Now that we've had a brief introduction to its design and a quick overview of its history, let's go back and actually delve into the Ark's design that I touched on at the beginning of the video. So we know the Space Colony ARK is round because it's something known as a Bernal sphere. Though this was mistranslated in the English dub to Bernoulli, adding much unneeded confusion to a very interesting but actual scientific concept in this otherwise fantastical franchise. A Bernal sphere is a theoretical type of space station that's built like a giant basketball. It's a spherical space station that's filled with pressurized air. And the spherical shape just comes from the fact that a sphere is just the most efficient shape to deal with pressure. A Bernal sphere would house colonists for long, if not permanent stays in space, first proposed by John Desmond Bernal in 1929. Bernal's original proposal described a hollow, non-rotating spherical shell 10 miles or 16 kilometers in diameter with a target population of roughly 20 to 30,000 people. This is interesting because, as I previously stated, the ARK is 15 kilometers or 9.32 miles across, almost identical to John Bernal's 16-kilometer or 10-mile proposal. Though the ARK seems to be able to hold 5 times as many residents as Bernal's proposed 20 to 30,000, even though it's 1 kilometer smaller. To put it quite simply, Bernal's proposed space station would hold roughly 30,000 people, whereas the ARK is smaller and somehow it holds 100,000. And if you play the games, you'll see that the ARK has just way oversized hallways and corridors, and just overall just a ton of wasted space. So that 100,000 estimate seems a bit off. Maybe more labs and dorms can be found in places like the Capsule Planet or in those inverted skyscrapers, along with some of the inverted skyscrapers that aren't even attached to the ARK itself. And I can already hear you typing, oh, there should be plenty of room inside that second hemisphere, or that southern hemisphere, whatever you want to call it. But no. So, from my understanding, that second hemisphere that gets blown away was just really there as camouflage to disguise the ARK as just another asteroid or moonlet. A pretty half-assed way, I guess, of covering it up and just having people forget about it. Though there are too many of us astronomy nerds out there to let that go. And what, everyone's just supposed to forget all the hype around this 9th wonder of the world? But here's a really genius part about that second hemisphere acting as sort of a fairing for the rest of the space station. Not only would it complete the half-assed illusion that it is just a comet, asteroid, or something to that effect, but it would also protect exterior features like the inverted skyscrapers, the communications antennas, the Eclipse Cannon, stuff like that from collision with space debris, along with protecting it from the other hazardous conditions in space like solar radiation and thermal expansion and cooling. And we'll loop back to this later, but it would be a place to catch any debris that falls off of the space station itself so it doesn't rain on the Earth below. And here's the fun bit, with the ARK having its own gravity, it could also act as a surface area for debris to collect on, thus keeping orbits clear and actually doing a much needed service that we need today, by helping reduce or even prevent a possible Kessler syndrome scenario, but as I mentioned, we'll loop back to that. So, I didn't know where else to put this in the script, but since we're talking about orbits and such, I thought this would fit in here. So, fun fact, apparently, the ARK has a unique orbit that in combination with the moon's orbit gives rise to an annual event where the ARK appears to be above the moon. This temporary arrangement somewhat resembles the head of a chow, and on an unrelated note, is also why some people refer to the ARK as Earth's second moon. Thus, trying to camouflage it doesn't really help, everyone knows it's there. Another reason why you can't just write it off as like, oh, just rock, forget about it, it's not a space station, shut up. Too many nerds. However, with the New Jersey drone sightings crap that's going on, I am just astonished at how people just don't know what anything in the sky is at all. Just at all. So I imagine people might be dumb enough to just buy that, oh yeah, it's been there the whole time. Yeah, shut up. Don't believe your lying eyes. But if there's any physics nerds in the audience, I would love to see if this orbit makes sense, because I don't know anything about any of that. Like math stuff, I can tell you about space facts, but I can't tell you the math behind them because I'm not a math nerd. But if there's anyone in the audience that could work out an orbit that would make sense to where it's only once a year where these things line up, I figure this would happen multiple times a year at least. And while we're calculating orbits, let's play with the Black Comet a little bit. Let's see if there's actually any comets out there that might match Drive's engagement. Because come to think of it, if the Black Comet passes close enough to the Earth to where you can clearly see it huge as day and it looks relatively close to the ARK's orbit, then we're inevitably flying through its debris field, and if that's the case, then there would be biological material on that, and then there would be cross-contamination leading to kind of like a two-way panspermia thing. See, just kind of neat stuff to think about when you really look into this stuff. But back on the design of the Space Colony ARK itself, we'll loop back to its most distinct feature, the Eclipse Cannon. It seems it was repaired sometime after it was heavily damaged and made inoperable by Sonic in the early 2000s during what has been dubbed simply as the ARK incident, as it seems to be functioning normally a few years later in the events of Shadow the Hedgehog. This hints that either the Guardian units of Nations bots left behind from Operation Arc Seal repaired the cannon, or Gunn returned to the ARK to either begin using it again, or they saw the importance of having an anti-asteroid system. And it's not like they didn't know they had a time limit of 50 years before that problematic comet came back. So it's likely that, yeah, they probably got it ready again to attack the Black Comet if the need arose, which it did. The ARK could also be used as a sort of Reagan Star Wars anti-ICBM system. I mean, the Eclipse Cannon has a lot of value, so there's a million reasons why it would be repaired in between the two games. Though it does seem that really only the Eclipse Cannon got repaired, as in the events of Shadow the Hedgehog, it's shown quite clearly that much of the Space Colony ARK has fallen into such disrepair that much of it is actually falling off and back on the Earth below. Imagine the meteor shower that would create. Although I imagine most of it would burn up in the atmosphere, much of it would actually make it through. I mean, for example, it wasn't long before making this video that some farmer in Canada found a piece of a SpaceX rocket on his ranch. And this is a patch, here we go, that my squadron was awarded in Texas for locating and recovering the debris from the February 1st, 2003 STS-107 OV-102 Columbia disaster. I bring this up to make a very important point. Yes, the space shuttle was specifically designed to re-enter the atmosphere and survive. That was sort of the whole point, otherwise you'd end up with a bunch of crispy astronauts. But that's the thing, not really. Only the exterior leading edges that would make direct contact with the plasma buildup were strong enough to withstand those conditions. This is partly why the OV-102 Columbia burned up on re-entry. Once the plasma made contact with the interior of the left wing of the ship burned up from the inside out. I bring this up because much of the ship, such as the fuel tanks, flight data recorder, and even the helmets, survived re-entry. And unlike your typical commercial airliner, the flight data recorder was not meant to withstand nearly what it went through. But somehow, it withstood falling from the edge of space all the way down into Texas, where the tape, literal, like, tape, we're not talking digital recorder here, was strewn out across a forest, and somehow they were able to recover enough of that. So, even stuff like, essentially, a fancy VCR was able to withstand re-entry. This is why decommissioned spacecraft and stations are often brought down over a place called Point Nemo in the Pacific. This is the furthest point from any land on Earth, so this reduces the chance of any debris impacting inhabited areas. So, the sheer amount of debris depicted in a level like Cosmic Fall from Shadow the Hedgehog, I can imagine much of it made landfall, probably costing billions in property damage and untold loss of life and human suffering. This, along with the debris generated by Eggman activating the Eclipse Cannon inside the second hemisphere, could also lead to what's known as Kessler syndrome, an exponentially cascading catastrophe in which pieces of space debris collide with each other, thus making more pieces of space debris to collide, in a self-feeding, ever-worsening cycle of destruction. This will then result in a spherical cloud of microscopic to grain-sized debris orbiting around the Earth at tens of thousands of miles an hour, along with continuous debris showers. This would make it extremely difficult, near impossible, to leave the planet. Things like cell phone communication, GPS, and modern banking would all be shut down and just a distant memory, as all these systems rely on satellite communication. This Kessler syndrome would prevent any such artificial satellites from being placed in orbit. And with how smart Dr. Gerald Robotnik was, it wouldn't surprise me that this was a final last-ditch resort for his doomsday plan. It seems that even if someone were to prevent his plan, as you saw in Sonic Adventure 2, The damage accumulated from years of neglect and re-entering the atmosphere would lead components to breaking free from the ARK and causing all the aforementioned problems. Aside from the Eclipse Cannon, the ARK also had other offensive and defensive armaments. The ARK featured double-barrel directed energy turrets, presumably to eliminate hazardous space debris, as I was mentioning, and enemy combatants. While all vital systems, such as the cannon's core and ARK's main power generator known as the Eternal Engine, are located deep inside the planetoid in order to protect them from collisions with space debris and outside attack. On the note of these components, the Eclipse Cannon is powered by a replica of the Shrine to the Master Emerald located in the cannon's core. But what powers the rest of the ARK systems? It seems the Eternal Engine acts as the main power generator for the space station. This would imply that it is powered by chaos energy, just not from the Chaos Emeralds themselves. So we can infer that the Eternal Engine is powered by something akin to a Chaos Drive, even maybe just a really, really big one, perhaps? If you watched my second video on the Blue Eagle, you'll know that Chaos Drives were created as part of research into Project Shadow, hence the connection to the Project Shadow branding on the Eternal Engine itself. Though the name Eternal Engine leads me to think of something like nuclear fission or fusion, or perhaps even perpetual energy creation. And on the related note of thermodynamics, I wanted to touch on the last major piece of the ARK's energy management system, and probably one of its most distinguishing features. The solar array wings are the little flaps that fold out when Dr. Eggman reveals the Eclipse Cannon that sort of make up the mustache of Robotnik's face on the underside of the ARK. These solar array wings are the only visible heat radiators on the entire station that I could find, though there could be several very small ones across the entire structure that we just don't see or notice. So I presume that these solar array wings that make up the distinctive Robotnik family mustache would have to act as the station's heat sinks that would be required for a station of that size. For example, the massive solar panels you see on the International Space Station aren't really for energy collection. They act as massive heat radiators to disperse the heat received from the sun in the vacuum of space with no atmosphere to disperse and absorb it. Without these giant solar radiators, the astronauts would be boiled alive inside the space station. Space isn't actually cold in direct sunlight, though the name solar array leads me to believe energy collection is also part of their function. One wonders how this might work then. The wings are absolutely friggin' huge, so it's quite possible that they have enough surface area to have systems that not only radiate low energy infrared photons, but they also simultaneously collect high energy photons as well. But I can't stress it enough, I'm not a math nerd, so I don't friggin' know. And unlike a certain Italian doctor I won't name, I actually admit when I don't know something or when I'm wrong. But now, on to the rest of the ARK's design. The ARK, being a space colony, basically a city in the sky, definitely resembles such, with its inverted towers and skyscrapers acting as laboratories and dormitories, along with several rail-based transit systems and highways to complete the aesthetic, along with several catwalks to traverse in between these towers. Though there are towers that are freely floating in space, and fun fact, one of which seems to be a disguised missile launcher. And something fun I noticed that I haven't heard anyone else bring up and that has absolutely fascinated me since I was a little kid. If you look at the less office building like towers, if you really look at them and you really look at the underside of the ARK itself, at least in Sonic Adventure 2, you'll notice the forward windscreen and the front of the ordnance pod from a TIE bomber from Star Wars. Just as part of the texture, just kind of hidden as a Where's Waldo in the texture. I don't know if that was on purpose as an Easter egg or not, so I just thought I'd bring it up, just thought that was kind of neat. And just because I am such a huge Star Wars ship nerd, the forward section of the TIE Bomber's ordnance pod actually does feature tiny little heat radiators. So there you go, that answers the question of, are there smaller heat radiators we don't see? Yes, there are. Finally, moving into the interior of the ARK, the inside of the ARK is a maze of catacombs, hallways, maintenance corridors, and laboratories. Even Maria, who spent almost her entire life on the station, would still get lost from time to time. It's never specifically stated what laboratories could be found aboard the colony, but if Dr. Robotnik's background is any indication, as he was the lead of the whole ARK project, it is likely the ARK had facilities for medical and pharmaceutical research, among other biological fields of study, along with chemistry, archaeology, astronomy, astrophysics, robotics, zoology, weapons of mass destruction research, and possibly even alchemy laboratories, believe it or not. Though, come to think of it, alchemy is basically just biochemistry and early pharmaceuticals before an Italian doctor told you how to live and what medicine to take. So, it's possible all this alchemy could have just been done in the pre-existing pharmaceutical laboratories. And one can only imagine what all the little gameplay gimmicks in the levels would be research into. Yeah, you just wonder, like the little spinning annoying gravity pole things, clearly into research for artificial gravity, but to what end? That kind of thing. But before we finish talking about the ARK's design, there was one last thing I couldn't quite figure out. I couldn't figure out what the eyes were on the ARK. My headcanon is that was always where Gerald Robotnik's really famous observation research lab thing was, that like all the cutscenes take place in. That's my guess, but if someone else knows what those eyeballs are supposed to be, since everything else has a purpose, please let me know. That's literally all the research I could find into the ARK, and I did everything. I looked through concept art, I looked through the Sonic Adventure 2 manual and the strategy guide, along with the same for Shadow the Hedgehog. I watched the whole Sonic Adventure 2 ARK on Sonic X. I watched any video on YouTube that even referenced the ARK. I looked for any hidden details in the maps. I read through Robotnik's journal. I committed absolute blasphemy and pre-ordered a game in order to get Robotnik's journal, which, by the way, is extremely disappointing. I was expecting it to be a tiny little pamphlet, but I was expecting at least like something the size of like the game manual. This little square napkin thing is pathetic. Come on, Sega. Don't do the Bethesda give us a grocery bag in place of a freaking canvas bag crap. Come on. It'd be that hard. I even dug through the Sonic Encyclopedia. Like, I dug through everything to get as much information as I could on this space station. And I know there's still stuff I missed. Like, as you can tell, I'm clearly not as versed as I should be on Emerald's lore. I honestly had no idea that had anything to do with the ARK until just before those Sonic Generations anime trailers came out for Shadow Story. Because, I'll be honest, I played like 5 seconds of Sonic Battle and was uninterested. I play Sonic games to go fast and blow stuff up. If I wanted to play Street Fighter, I would play Street Fighter. But I can say, up until I made this video and told all of you, I was the only person that really knew the canon size of the Space Colony ARK. I freaking love that. I feel like an actual, like, anthropologist or archaeologist, and I made an actual discovery about some ancient piece of lore that no one else knows. I absolutely love that. I mean, I know I'm not literally actually the only person on the internet to know about this lore. I mean, I was just talking to someone the other day about the eye catch cards for the egg carrier, which I should have used in my video, and I totally forgot I had a folder full of them. Oh well. But that said, I know I'm not like the only person, but it's not on the wiki anywhere, and it's like nowhere else other than on this little eye catch card. So I'm like the only person to have documented it, or one of the very, very few people that have documented it, at least. And until next time, don't forget to fire the Eclipse Cannon at that subscribe button and bell icon. And definitely leave a comment down below, and definitely fill me in if I missed anything. And I'm pretty sure because I revealed my political leanings, I don't have to beg for comments this time. So when you leave that angry comment, just know that I'll be laughing at it, and it drives engagement. And while I'm here baiting y'all, here's a fun thing. Some of the save data I used to record the footage off of my GameCube comes from an extremely famous YouTuber that you all know, and I got it from them personally. Maybe one day I'll reveal who, where, and how I got this save data, but we'll have to see. If my channel grows, just maybe. Just maybe. But as always, guys, peace. And remember, most importantly of all, if a human disagrees with you, let him live. In 100 billion galaxies, you will not find another.
Children's and grandchildren's time, with the United States as a service and information economy, with nearly all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues, when the people have lost the ability to send their own agendas or knowledge to be questioned those in authority, when clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes. Our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true. We slide, almost without noticing, back into superstition and darkness. The darknessly influential media, the 30-second sound bites, countdown to 10 cents sounds the less. Most common denominator programming, credulous persons on pseudo-shams and superstition, especially a connoisseur of ignorance.